In this lecture, we'll look at the beginnings of Linux, where it came from, and how it got to be what it is. We'll also look at the landscape of Linux and give you a broad overview of what it looks like when you have a graphical user interface, what it looks like when you just have a command line. And what you'll see is that the underpinnings, the very basis of Linux, is all the same, whether there is a graphical user interface or there's just a command line, which usually happens when you're using server. If you're going to be a Linux administrator, more than likely you're only going to see a command line because you'll be using the server version. And there's a reason, a very important reason for this, and we'll touch on that later. But for now, let's get rid of the talking ahead and dive into Linux. So let's start talking about Linux. Linux is based on an operating system that started around 1970 that's called UNIX. And sometimes you'll see UNIX spelled this way, and other times you'll see UNIX spelled this way. Well, spelling the same, the capitalization is a little different. And there's a philosophy behind the creation and use of Unix, and that is that you have a number of very simple commands, and each command does one thing and does it very well. And in order to create more powerful commands, what we do is we chain these together to provide for more powerful capabilities. And we'll see lots of examples of this. We'll start out slowly and show you the individual commands, and later on we'll start chaining commands together, and you'll see how powerful Linux can be, and you can do anything that you could do with a graphical user interface from the command line in Linux. And so there are certain standards and conventions that you're going to find with any version of Linux and Unix, and those are the things that we'll be concentrating on in this class. However, there is some variation between Unix operating systems, but there are some variations between different versions of Unix operating systems, and we'll touch on those occasionally. But what we want to make sure we do is to look at the standards and conventions that are consistent across versions of Linux and Unix. And so what does the Unix system architecture look like? Well, we have our hardware, that is our PC running down here, and on top of that we have something called a kernel. And a kernel is sort of the bridge between applications and the actual data processing that's done at the hardware level. So it's almost like you might say the brains of the computer. And as you'll see in a moment, that every Linux system or Unix system, and even Microsoft Windows and Mac OS X, has a kernel. In fact, all of them are pretty much set up this way from a broad perspective. Okay, so you're not interacting directly with the kernel. What we're usually doing is interacting directly with the applications. So notice a couple of things here is that we have also here in blue is we have something called X. And X is a windowing system, and essentially all that does is it allows applications to draw squares or rectangles on the screen so that applications can provide a graphical user interface for the user. And then we have something called a shell, and we'll be working very closely with the shell. And a shell is really just a command line interpreter that provides an interface. Notice that I didn't say graphical interface, but it provides an interface between the applications, or low-level applications, not the graphical applications, but low-level applications, and the kernel. And as we know from Windows, let me pop this up here quickly, is that most of you should already be familiar with the command line interpreter. That's all that is right there, is a shell. And it allows you to interact with the computer without a graphical interface. While there may be great many instances or examples of differences between Linux, Unix, and Microsoft Windows, both provide you with a shell. The primary difference is that Linux was really made to be used from the shell, especially when we're talking about the server version. So another attribute of Linux is that it provides for a multi-user environment so that every user needs an account to use a computer. Now, a lot of you may not have ever encountered Windows 95 or 98 or ME, and you probably use the more recent versions, maybe XP or Windows 7 and maybe even Windows 8. But with the older versions of Linux, the multi-user versions, is that you had to have an account and you had to log in order to use the computer. And the same thing goes with Unix and Linux, is that you have to have an account, you must log in, and the reason is to provide for accountability and security. With the old Windows 95, 98, and ME versions of Windows, all you had to do is hit escape and you would be logged in and everybody would be using the same account. But as you'll see throughout this course as well as other courses that I might teach, especially the security courses, is that that is not a good idea, especially when it comes to security. Also, Unix provides for separation of different user files and configuration settings so each user can tailor their environment to exactly how they would like to use it. And as I alluded to earlier, the Unix philosophy also looks at having small components, small programs that can do things very well. That is, they perform a single task. Now, if you look at this line right here with the find, this looks like it's very complicated, and essentially it is to you who are just starting to learn Linux. But it's not really. If we break this down, if we look at the first word here, we have something called find. What are we trying to do? We're trying to find a file. So that's pretty easy to understand. Here we have the dot, the period. That means, hey, start right here. Wherever you are in your directories, for example, we run back here. What directory are we starting in? C, users, Craig EP. God, I hate that convention. Anyway, we're starting in this directory. So we're starting from whatever the current directory is, and we're looking for a file named what? Foo. What do we want to do? We want to print that to the screen, and this is where the chaining comes in. Notice this little command right here. This says take what's right here on the left-hand side of this symbol, which is called the pipe symbol, and that's on your on every keyboard, and send it to whatever this is. And ls is simply a directory listing, like you see here. That's a directory listing. And finally, the remaining portions of this is to say, okay, take whatever this is, and I want you to redirect that. See the greater than symbol here? Redirect it to a file named found.files. So we're really doing three things here. And trust me, you can type this very quickly and perform the exact same functions as you would if you're trying to do that. And if you think about how you would do that in Windows, this is actually a lot quicker and has a lot more flexibility. So, what is Linux? We've been talking about Unix. Well, as it turns out, Linux is really only a kernel. It's just this right here. So when you talk about Linux, although people use the term Linux to refer to a distribution, and I'll explain that in a second, but it's really only this right here. And it was developed in the early 1990s by Linus Torvalds, who was a Finnish student, F-I-N-N-I-S-H, from Finland, who wanted to create an operating system that would run on a PC, not any of the old Unix boxes, but on small PCs to mimic what a Unix would be if it was able to run on a small PC, and of course it couldn't. So he was trying to create an operating system that would run on Intel systems that were running the i386, and I'm sure pretty most of you in this class do not remember the i386, but that was available back in the 1990s and had limited RAM and usually a limited hard drive system. And so you can't interact directly with the kernel, so what you have to do is you have to add UNIX utilities. And UNIX utilities are standard tools run from the command line, like we saw previously right here, that run on, this says nearly all Linux systems. I'm not sure if there are any Linux systems that don't run the standard UNIX utilities. And these come from something called the GNU project, which was created by Richard Stallman from MIT. And what that did is provide a standard set of utilities that can be used on any Unix or Linux. So if you hop from one Linux distribution to another, or one version of Unix to another, you would be able to use it. So what is Linux? Well, Linux, again, is a kernel, but it has many different distributions. And essentially what that means is you take the Linux kernel and you package it up with a bunch of other tools for the end user to use. And so that would be the GNU utilities, as I spoke about previously, and maybe a graphical interface, and you have yourself a Linux distribution. So all of them now come with an installation program, and there's very many distributions of Linux, and I'll hop over in a second to show you how many there are. But some of the big companies include Red Hat, Ubuntu, Knoppix, Debian, SUSE, Mandrake, which actually has changed to Mandriva now. That's a French distribution. And we also have Mint, which is what you'll be using in this class. So what's different about these distributions? Well, something called the packages included in each distribution. And packages are simply little pieces of software, little application tools, graphical interfaces, editors, things like that, which may change from distribution to distribution. The amount of support that is provided to each. For example, Red Hat is a commercial company, and Ubuntu, Knoppix, and Debian are community supported Linux distributions, which means that you can't pay to have any support for them. But if you do need support, actually, I'm sorry, Ubuntu did change that. You can pay to have Ubuntu support. But the other ones, including Knoppix, and let me write in Mint here, are community-based. So, get my fingers on the right keys. SUSE also used to be that's a German company that used to be based on Red Hat. And Mandrake also was a commercial company, and that went under, and that changed its name to Mandriva. Okay, so also the cost of these. If you pay, you get support from the company. Otherwise, you only get community support. But as we'll find is that if you have a question about Linux, there's probably going to be a question that's already been asked on some forum on the internet where you can find the answer. Okay, so how do you use a Linux system? Well, you boot it up like you would Microsoft Windows. You turn on your computer, the bootloader loads the kernel into RAM, and then all the system processes start to load into memory. Once you get to a login screen, you will need a username and a password, and the interface will be different whether you have a graphical user interface installed or a simple text interface. And so let's jump over here and look at this right now and see what that looks like. So I've just booted Mint 12 in here, and notice here is that I have my login screen for Philip Krager and my password. So we've got a graphical user interface here. I type in my password, and it takes a second just to log in. And after a few seconds, we have our graphical interface to Linux. And this doesn't look so bad, does it? How do we learn what a computer does? Well, we click on things, at least when it has a graphical interface. If you notice here in the menu bar, if you click on Applications, this is a simple menuing system that shows you all the different applications that are available, starting with accessories. Notice that you have a calculator, a disk utility, a screenshot capture utility, a text editor, which looks just like any text editor, right? And we'll keep going down, and we'll come back to accessories in just a minute. You've got a document viewer, a scanner. If you want to get on the internet, you can do desktop sharing just like you would in Windows. You have an instant messenger. You have Firefox, which hopefully all of you use, something other than Internet Explorer. You have a mail system that looks quite a bit like Outlook. You have a BitTorrent client. You have a chat client. As you see, we've got other applications, sound and video system, and system tools. Now let's go back up here and notice a terminal. This is our shell, and this is how you'll be interacting with Linux, and I'll show you why in a moment. Notice that we're at a command line, and notice this says PC. That's my username. Although the original login screen called me Philip Kreger, that's not how you are referred to by the computer. So there's a distinction between your full name and your actual login username. So I always use my login name is PC, and notice this says @ PC @ and Mint 12 is the name of this machine. And so I know that PC's logged in at Mint 12. And this will be important later on because you may be logging into another machine through various protocols, and this will change depending upon the name of the machine that you're logging into. Notice the little tilde here. The tilde means that you're in your home directory. And let's by the way, what I want you to do right now is to pause the video. I want you to open your Mint machine. I want you to log in and follow along with me. Notice that you have a pause button that you can use to pause and then resume play anytime you like. So anytime I do something in Linux, I want you to have your virtual machine open and following along with me. And that's the best way to learn how to use Linux, is by doing it and following what I'm doing. Okay, so CD, you know that CD has a similar command in DOS. That means to change directory. And what we're going to do is we're going to say CD space and ... And what that means is I want to change directory to my parent directory. Let's flip back over here to show you what I mean. So my current directory in this shell in Windows 7 is C users Craig EP. The current directory is Craig EP. The parent directory is what? Users. So the current directory is Craig EP, the parent directory is users. Now if I were in users, what would be the parent directory? It would be the root C directory. So notice that the prompt is a little different than what we saw before, but if I hit enter now, I'm in home. Now remember in Windows that we type dir to get a directory listing. Well, in all Linux systems and Unix systems, it's called ls for list. And it says that there's one directory underneath home, and that directory is called PC, and that is my home directory. Also notice that in both of these is that there, or the prompts rather, is that there's a $sign. And that just means, hey, this is the end of the prompt. That's all that means. I'm not going to get too far into it, but you can actually change that if you want, but I would suggest that you don't, because it's good to have a similar prompt across all different Unixes, or all different distributions that you use, so you understand that that is simply the end of the command prompt. Okay, so that's what a terminal looks like. Remember, this is a shell. We're actually interacting with a piece of software that understands what CD means, that understands what the dot dot means, that understands what ls means. So recall I told you that a server version is more than likely, 99 times out of 100, not going to have this nice, beautiful graphical user interface where you can click on things and see what's going on. But instead, see, this looks very much like the user interface in Windows. But what you're going to have instead is this. That's what you're going to see. It doesn't have a graphical user face. Everything that you'll see will be a text interface, and then you'll interact with the system solely from the command line. So this is a different version of Linux called Ubuntu, and so let's see if it differs any from the Mint version, just from a command perspective. So I'm going to log in as PC. I'm going to type in my password. Okay, so it shows us when I last log in, the version of the kernel that I'm using and the version of the distribution of Linux, Ubuntu 10.10. And so I'm back at the command prompt. Now look at and note that the prompt looks very similar to what we saw in Mint in the graphical interface. I'm PC at Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the name of my machine. Notice that there is a tilde there. That means I'm in my home directory, and then we have the end of the prompt. So let's type ls here. Why don't you do that? And it shows me I don't have any files or directories in my current directory. And that's not exactly true, and I'll show you why in just a second. So let's cd up to the parent directory. Ooh, that's home. So we saw that previously in Mint. We type ls again. Oh, so in home it looks like we've got two directories. And notice that this is in blue, kind of as you saw it in, let me go back over here to Mint. Notice that this is in blue, and that's just a convention that that is used by Linux, and it can be changed. You can have this any color you want, but it's nice to know that when you type in a command and you see the blue, that it's talking about a directory or a folder. And by the way, we use the term directory in Linux just like we use the term folder in Windows. Let's go back over to server. And notice that we have two folders, one named Jehoshaphat and one named PC. PC was my home directory. Well, what do you think Jehoshaphat is? It's going to be another user who has their own home directory. So it looks like there's at least two users that have login accounts on this Ubuntu machine. So let's go back over to Linux. Let's go back over to our Mint 12 system. Well, how do I find out all the different parameters and arguments that you can use with ls? Well, as it turns out, there's a lot that you can use. And the way we do this, and what I want you to get used to now, is using something called the man pages. And that just means manual. That is just like a computer manual that you would flip through, that usually comes with your operating system or your computer. And pretty much every command, can't think of one that doesn't, will come with something called a manual entry. And we access that by typing man and then the name of the command, ls. Why don't you go do that now and hit enter. And there is the help file, the manual file for ls. It tells you the name, ls, list directory contents, the synopsis, the options that you can use with this. Notice that these are in brackets. And if you use the up and down arrow key, you can go through and read all the options that are available for ls. So how do you sort through this if you're trying to find an argument that you think you know what the name is, but you're not sure exactly what it is, and you don't want to arrow up and down to find it? Well, I'm going to do some magic here, and what we do is that we can find this by hitting the / key, which allows us to search for a keyword for which we want to search. So right below the question mark key on your keyboard, you hit the / and let's type in the word long, L-O-N-G. You do this along with me. Go ahead and do that and hit enter. And what this does is it will show you every occurrence of the word long in the manual pages. So this is the first one. Mandatory arguments to long options are mandatory for short options too. Well, that's not really helpful. That's not one of these arguments down here. So let's go to the next instance of the word long. So we hit N for next. Oh, we're getting somewhere. Notice that we see something in here, -- format, long, -L. Let's hit N again to go to the next entry. And we keep hitting N. And this is what we're looking for. So we hit N several times until we came upon the -L, use a long listing format. So the -L. So let's see what that does. Let's hit Q. Notice this is down here. Hit Q to quit. And let's combine the A and the L, -AL, and see what happens. Wow. That gave us, we can scroll back up here. That gave us a lot of information. So this is the long listing. And notice over here to the left of the first entry, what is this again? That's the current folder, the dot. This says D. What does that mean? It's a directory. And let's skip over this, the RWX in here, the 22, the PC, although you should probably understand what that means. The PC means I'm the owner of the file. Notice it sets a size for the directory. If you go through here, you'll notice that all the D's have a 4096. That's how much space they take up just for the directory listing. It has a date and a time. So the long listing gives us a lot of information about the directories and files that we didn't get with the ls-a. But you notice that, oh, I kind of jumped ahead a little bit, is that we can scroll up and down to see all the different files and all the specific information associated with the files and directories. Now I'm taking this very slowly just so that you can walk along with me and pause the video and do what I'm doing and scroll up and down, and anytime you want, if you want to try another command, if you want to go back to the manual page and try another command, go ahead and do so. In fact, I highly recommend it because that's the only way you're going to understand how to use the manual page, is by using it. Okay, so but let's say you've already typed one of these commands, because we've already typed man ls, right? Well, what if we want to go back to that same command? How would you do that? Would you go back and type man ls? Well, let's think about this for a second. Let's go back up. Let's go back up here. See if I can find it there. What if we typed this and we got one thing wrong, or we wanted to change the name right here? Do we really want to go back and type find dot dash name foo print? No, I don't want to do that. I just want to go back and rerun this. I want to do it very quickly. Don't make me waste time by retyping the command. Well, let's use our up and down arrow keys and see what happens. Here I'm going to be using the up arrow key. There's man ls. There's ls-a. There's ls, cd. So it looks like that Linux is remembering all the different commands that I ran. So a real Linux or Unix guru will know how to use these up and down arrow keys to rerun a command that they've already run. It's much quicker to to use the up and down arrow keys, in most instances that it is to retype the command. So try that yourself and see that it works.